This is a five-star restaurant, not a soup kitchen. People like you don't belong here. The words cracked through the dining room like glass shattering against marble. Richard Hale's voice wasn't hushed. It was deliberate, loud, aimed not just at Elena Brooks but at every guest watching. He wanted witnesses. He wanted dominance. A tray of red wine tilted in Elena's trembling hands. She hadn't dropped it. Richard had slapped it aside with a flick of his wrist. The liquid bled across the linen like a fresh wound on silk, soaking into the pristine white cloth. Gasps fluttered through the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. A businessman lowered his fork. A woman angled her phone discreetly, the tiny red light of her camera blinking alive. Elena stood frozen, chest rising and falling too fast. 25 years old, a hospitality student working double shifts to pay for school. She had seen rudeness before. But this was a public stripping of dignity. Her eyes glistened, though she refused to let a single tear fall. Richard smirked, straightening his crimson tie like a king confirming his throne. He turned slightly, making sure nearby tables heard every word. "Clean it up, on your knees," he ordered, "or consider this your last shift." The word struck like a gavel. Elena flinched as though sentenced. Her knees bent slightly before she caught herself. She gripped the tray harder, her knuckles whitening, her pride fighting against collapse. Silence thickened. The chandeliers above no longer sparkled, they glared, exposing every crack of cruelty in the room. At a corner booth near the window, a man set down his glass of water. He had ordered nothing else, no wine, no entree, just water. He wore a pale gray blazer, no tie, no fanfare. Alone, quiet, invisible by choice. That man was Darius Cole. 42. Billionaire. CEO of Cole Hospitality Group, the very company that owned Maison Cole, and 30 more five-star establishments worldwide. Today, no entourage, no badge of power. He had come undercover, as he often did, to watch how his restaurants treated people when no one knew the owner was in the room. Now, he was watching. Richard reached down, snatched the linen napkin from Elena's hand, and tossed it to the ground like garbage. "You think wearing that apron makes you equal to the people paying for this experience? You're replaceable. Disposable." Elena's jaw clenched. Her lips parted, a protest trembling there. "Sir, it was you who..." Not another word. Richard snapped, his voice cutting her down before the truth could rise. The couple seated at the table glanced away, ashamed. A man at the bar muttered, "This feels wrong." Still, Richard basked in the silence, mistaking fear for obedience. He puffed his chest and declared, "You've served your last plate here. Security will escort you out." Elena's breath caught. The tray slipped slightly, a glass clinking against another. Her dignity was being stripped in front of strangers, her job dangling on the whim of a man who mistook cruelty for leadership. And at the corner booth, Darius Cole folded his napkin slowly, deliberately. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes dark, steady, burned with a memory. He was 16 again, bussing tables in Atlanta, watching a manager call his mother slow after she worked a 12-hour dishwashing shift. He remembered the sound of her crying in the kitchen that night, the sound that lived in his bones. This was not new. This was not random. It was systemic. The present snapped back as Elena stood rigid, a single tear threatening to fall but refusing to drop. Around her, phones lifted higher, murmurs swelled louder. Richard smirked wider, mistaking silence for surrender. And Darius leaned forward. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here." Now, back to Darius. He placed his napkin neatly on the table, his water glass untouched. The room thought it was about to watch a server fired. But what it was really about to see was power revealed. The storm had just begun. "Elena, enough!" Richard barked, his voice cracking through the dining room like a gavel. "Hand over your apron. You're finished here." The tray in Elena's hands rattled. She stood still, lips pressed tight, as if silence could keep her from breaking apart. But her eyes dark, steady, were not begging. They were bearing witness. From table 6, The red light of a phone camera glowed brighter. A young man whispered into it. They're humiliating her. In broad daylight. In a five-star restaurant. His companion urged softly. Keep filming. Richard noticed, his jaw tightening. Put that phone away, now. The young man didn't move. A murmur rippled through the room, like wind stirring before a storm. Richard turned back to Elena, raising his voice higher, feeding on the tension. Do you think you're irreplaceable? You think anyone in this city can't do your job better? Out? Now. He reached forward, yanked at the strings of her apron, and tossed it onto the floor. Gasps broke loose, one woman covering her mouth, another muttering, "This isn't right." Richard gestured sharply toward the entrance. Security. His tone was triumphant, as though he'd won some battle for control. The double doors at the front of Maison Cole swung open. A tall man in a navy uniform strode in, shoulders squared, earpiece gleaming. He scanned the room, then fixed on Elena. Problem here. His question was flat, rehearsed. Richard sneered, pointing at her. Yes, unauthorized, clumsy. She's disrupting service. Remove her. Elena's breath hitched. Her palms trembled at her sides. For a moment, she looked like the teenager she once was, standing outside her mother's cleaning job, waiting to be picked up, watching doors close in her face. At the corner booth, Darius Cole shifted. He set his phone on the table, screen lit with a single name, Carla Evans, assistant. His thumb hovered, then pressed dial. Carla's voice came crisp and immediate. Protocol ready, sir? Darius's eyes never left Richard. Not yet. Keep the line open. The room buzzed now, phones half raised. Whispers louder. The luxury dining room, transforming into a courtroom without walls. Richard's voice boomed again. Escort her out. She doesn't belong here. But before the security guard could move, Elena finally spoke, her voice trembling but audible. I do belong here. I've worked every shift, every weekend. I've never. Richard cut her off, snarling. Your work means nothing. At that moment, silence thickened. Every gaze shifted, not to Richard, not to Elena, but to the man in the gray blazer rising slowly from his corner booth. Darius Cole. His presence, until now invisible, was about to change everything. The dining room seemed to contract as Darius rose from his seat. No sudden gestures. No raised voice. Just presence. Calm. Immovable. Like a stone surfacing through still water. Conversations halted. Forks froze. Even the jazz from the speakers seemed to fade, as if the room itself leaned in. Richard blinked, taken aback by the interruption. Sir, please sit down. This doesn't concern you. Darius adjusted his blazer with one slow motion. It concerns everyone in this room, he said quietly, yet every syllable carried like steel dragged across concrete. The security guard hesitated, glancing between Richard's sharp command and Darius's steady gaze. Richard scoffed, trying to reclaim control. She's not fit for this restaurant. She's clumsy, incompetent, and humiliated. Darius interrupted, his tone slicing clean through Richard's words. He turned his eyes to Elena, not because of a mistake, but because someone mistook cruelty for leadership. A ripple moved across the room. Guests shifted in their chairs, eyes darting between them. Phones tilted higher, no longer discreet. Richard's face flushed. You don't understand how this business works. Darius's expression didn't change. I understand perfectly. I built it. Elena's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. She didn't fully understand what he meant yet. Richard barked a humorless laugh, mistaking Darius's calm for bluff. Oh really? You're some critic? Some watchdog blogger? Save your theatrics. Darius stepped closer, his voice dropping but gaining weight. You asked her to kneel in front of strangers. You stripped her uniform from her body like a badge you could revoke at will. Tell me, does that make you feel powerful? Or does it only expose how weak you truly are? The words hung heavy. For the first time, Richard faltered, his mouth opening. No words forming. From the back, a woman's voice cut through the silence. He's right. A murmur of agreement followed, guests emboldened by the fracture in Richard's authority. The young man still filming whispered into his phone, This is unreal. He's standing up for her. His companion added, "And look at Richard, he's cracking." The security guard shifted uncomfortably, his stance no longer confident. Richard snapped, trying to claw back control. "Enough. I'll have both of you escorted out." "Guards!" But his words trailed off as Darius pulled his phone from the table. He pressed it to his ear, his voice steady. "Carla. Begin documentation. Every word, every action. Timestamp it all." Carla's reply came sharp, audible to those nearby. "Confirmed, sir. Recording and logging in real time." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Who do you think you are?" Darius's gaze locked onto him, unwavering. "The last person you'll ever humiliate in this building without consequence." The dining room exhaled a collective gasp, a shifting of weight, a recognition that something irreversible had just been set into motion. Elena stood straighter, shoulders squaring as though his words had given her spine new strength. Richard stepped back half a pace, his bluster thinning. "This is ridiculous. He's bluffing. Nobody here has authority over me." But even as he spoke, the truth was already unraveling, and the room knew it. Darius Cole had arrived not as a customer, but as reckoning. "You're bluffing." Richard spat, though his voice lacked the conviction it had moments earlier. He adjusted his cufflinks with trembling fingers, as if tidying his suit could restore his authority. "You're no one, just another loud guest trying to stir trouble." The words rang hollow. Even the security guard glanced sideways, uncertain. Darius didn't flinch. He simply slipped his phone back into his pocket, his movements measured, deliberate. His silence spoke louder than Richard's bluster. But Richard wasn't done. He raised his chin, his voice pitched higher to reach the diners watching with growing intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive this distraction. This man clearly doesn't understand the standards we uphold here. This is Maison Cole. We don't tolerate incompetence. We don't tolerate lies." He jabbed a finger at Elena. "And we certainly don't tolerate frauds, pretending to be what they're not." Elena's face burned, shame tightening her chest. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the young man at table 6 spoke first. His voice cut through the room. "She's not lying. I've watched her serve 3 tables perfectly. You humiliated her on purpose." Heads turned. Phones lifted higher. The fragile wall protecting Richard's authority began to crumble. A woman near the bar added, "I saw it too. You knocked the tray yourself." Richard's face flushed crimson. "You people don't understand protocol." His voice cracked like glass under pressure. "If I say she's out, she's out." Darius finally stepped closer, his shoes silent on the marble floor. "Protocol?" His voice was low, but the word carried weight. "Is that what you call it when you strip dignity from the people who serve under you? Is that what you call it when you make her kneel?" The chandeliers overhead seemed to burn brighter, throwing Richard's sweat-slick face into harsh relief. For a moment, silence blanketed the dining room. Then, from the far corner, another voice rose, this time from a junior hostess barely out of training. Her hands shook as she held her notepad, but her words were steady. "She belongs here. I checked her schedule this morning. Her shift is valid." A collective murmur surged through the room. The witness had spoken. The balance shifted further. Richard snapped, "Stay out of this or you'll regret it." The hostess flinched, but didn't retreat. The truth matters." Phones captured everything. 100 quiet jurors were already forming their verdict. Darius's voice cut through again, calm, unyielding. "You've mistaken fear for loyalty, Richard. But fear doesn't last. Truth does." Richard's hands balled into fists. His gaze flicked from the cameras to Darius, then to Elena, and finally back again. He was cornered, and he knew it. Still, desperation clung to him. "You don't belong here either," he snapped at Darius. "You're not staff. You're not management. You're just another nobody." The room bristled. Phones tilted forward. Guests leaned in. Darius's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a razor's edge. "Is that what you believe? That I don't belong?" Richard sneered, mistaking calm for weakness one last time. "Exactly. You don't belong in this restaurant." The silence that followed was electric, the kind that comes before lightning strikes, because the truth was about to land, and when it did, Richard Hale's world would collapse. "Security, remove them both." Richard barked, his face blotched red, veins rising in his neck. He pointed sharply first at Elena, then at Darius. "Out." Now, the guard hesitated. He had been trained to follow management orders without question. But the weight of a dozen phones filming, the murmurs circling the dining room, and Darius's unshaken stare froze his steps. "Did you not hear me?" Richard roared. "I said remove them." The guard shifted uneasily, his hand brushing the radio at his belt. "Sir, maybe we should wait. This looks—" Richard cut him off, his voice shrill with desperation. "Do your job or you'll lose it." The words echoed too loudly. Guests recoiled. A woman at the bar muttered, "He's panicking." Another whispered, "This doesn't feel like leadership. This feels like bullying." Elena stood trembling, hands pressed against her apronless uniform. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but humiliation had tied her tongue. She was seconds away from being dragged out of the restaurant she had worked so hard to keep afloat. That was when the hostess stepped forward again, her notepad clutched to her chest. Her voice wavered but didn't break. "He's telling the truth." Richard spun on her. "What did you say?" The hostess swallowed, then repeated louder. "He belongs here. She belongs here. You can't just erase people because you don't like the way they look." A murmur surged. Guests nodded, some standing now, forming a quiet human barricade between Elena and the guard. Richard's eyes widened, fury twisting his features. "All of you sit down. You think you can defy me? This is my restaurant." The words slipped before he realized the weight of them. Darius's lips curved, the faintest trace of a smile breaking his calm mask. "Your restaurant?" Darius said, his voice low but cutting through every corner of the room. "Are you sure about that?" Richard sneered. "Don't play games with me. You're nothing here. Nothing." Phones zoomed in. Guests leaned closer. The room's silence was no longer fear, it was anticipation. Darius slipped his phone from his pocket once more, pressing it to his ear. His tone was deliberate, every syllable sharpened like a blade. "Carla, log this. We're past warnings. Prepare the documentation." Carla's voice came crisp and clear through the line. "Confirmed, sir." "Executing protocol." The guard froze, his eyes darting nervously between them. "What's happening?" he muttered. Darius's gaze never left Richard. "What's happening," he said, "is accountability." Elena lifted her head, a flicker of hope breaking through her humiliation. Richard laughed, brittle and sharp. "You don't scare me. You don't own this place. I do." The silence that followed was dangerous. Guests shifted, whispers swirled. Darius finally stepped forward, standing just a breath away from Richard. His eyes locked like steel. His voice dropped to a tone that chilled the room. "You just humiliated a server. In the restaurant I own." Gasps erupted. Phones captured every second. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. The hostess stared wide-eyed. Even the guard stepped back, as if the ground beneath his feet had shifted. Richard blinked, face draining of color. What did you just say?" Darius's words landed like a verdict. "I am Darius Cole, CEO of Cole Hospitality Group. And this building, this brand, this entire enterprise you work for me." The dining room erupted not in chaos, but in clarity. Applause broke, phones flashed, whispers turned into exclamations. Richard Hale had no ground left to stand on. The room erupted, gasps collided with murmurs, then gave way to applause from a few bold diners who had waited too long for justice to surface. Phones angled higher, capturing Richard's face as it drained of color. "You're lying," Richard stammered, his voice, once sharp as a whip, now cracked like old wood. "That's impossible. If you were the owner, I would have known." Darius stood firm, the chandelier's light glinting across his steady gaze. "You didn't know, because you never looked. You only saw what you wanted, someone beneath you, someone to humiliate." The hostess whispered to Elena, barely audible but laced with awe. "He really owns it. He's the one." Elena's breath hitched. The shame still clung to her like smoke, but hope flickered now, small, fragile, but alive. Richard tried to recover, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to him. He's just another fraud." A voice from the back cut through. "We're listening." It was the man at table 6, his phone still recording. "We watched what you did, and we're not buying your excuses." Applause rose louder this time, joined by voices of agreement. "He owns this place. He stood up when no one else did." "You're finished, Richard." Richard's mask crumbled. "You can't all believe him. I've run this restaurant for 10 years. Darius stepped forward, closing the distance until Richard had nowhere left to retreat. His tone was calm, precise, lethal in its restraint. 10 years of running my restaurant, and in all that time, you learned nothing. Standards don't mean chandeliers and wine lists. Standards mean dignity, and you failed." The security guard lowered his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped back from Elena and folded his arms not in defiance of Darius, but in quiet allegiance. Richard's composure cracked. You can't do this. I'm protected." The board reports to me," Darius said. The words landed with the weight of a hammer. "Effective immediately, your access, your position, your title gone." As if on cue, Carla's voice came sharp and clear through Darius's phone. "System update complete. Richard Hale's credentials revoked." A chime sounded from Richard's own tablet, clipped to his belt. He fumbled with it, but the screen glowed red. "Access denied." Gasps rippled again, followed by cheers. Elena stared, stunned. Richard's reign over her life had dissolved in a single moment, replaced by the steady voice of a man who had chosen silence until it mattered most. Richard's face sagged, his arrogance draining into desperation. "You don't understand. I built this place. I made it what it is." Darius tilted his head, the faintest glimmer of pity crossing his face. "You didn't build it, you broke it. And now, you're done." The diners applauded louder, a wave crashing through the room. Some stood. Some shouted. One woman raised her phone high and declared, "Justice served." Elena's hands trembled, but this time not from fear. For the first time all shift, she felt seen not as replaceable, not as disposable, but as human. Richard staggered, his shoulders slumping. The room no longer belonged to him, it belonged to truth, and to the man who had just revealed it. The dining room was no longer Richard Hale's stage. The applause had shifted the center of gravity, and now every eye was fixed on him, not with respect, but with condemnation. Richard's chest heaved. "This is a setup," he barked, his voice trembling on the edges. "All of you brainwashed by this man's lies." But the lie no longer held. The hostess stepped forward again, her small frame trembling but her voice clear. "I saw his name in the system. Darius Cole. Executive level. Owner clearance. He isn't lying." Gasps rippled once more. Guests leaned into their phones, whispering into their live streams, their captions already forming. "Manager exposed. CEO undercover. Justice in real time." Richard spun on the hostess, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this." Before he could say more, Elena spoke. Her voice, quiet at first, but steady. We've all regretted staying silent long enough." The words hung in the air. For the first time, Elena wasn't trembling. She was standing taller, her shame burned away by the blaze of truth around her. Applause broke again, diners shouting, "She's right. We saw everything. Enough is enough." Richard's control collapsed, piece by piece, like a crumbling facade. "Security, do something," he shouted desperately, but the guard shook his head. Not against him. Not against the owner. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came. The realization clawed through him. He had no power left. Not here. Not now. Darius stepped closer, his voice low, sharp, and undeniable. "You see, Richard, authority isn't a suit, or a title, or a table of frightened staff. Authority is earned, and you lost it the moment you tore down your own people." The chandeliers overhead seemed to shimmer brighter, as though spotlighting the final act. A woman at table 4 stood, holding her phone high. "We're streaming this. The world is watching." Richard's face drained of color. His hands, once clenched in command, now trembled at his sides. He stammered, "You can't, this can't." Darius didn't need to raise his voice. His calm was more powerful than Richard's rage. You called this your restaurant. But dignity doesn't belong to you. It belongs to every person who steps inside. And today, you proved you don't deserve to be part of it. The applause thundered now, no longer scattered but unified, rising like a verdict. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes wide, tears threatening but this time born of release, not humiliation. Richard staggered back a step, cornered by truth, by witnesses, by the very walls of the restaurant he thought he controlled. Darius's gaze never wavered. Your last order was to remove her. Mine is to remove you. The guard stepped forward not toward Elena, but toward Richard, and the room erupted. The guard hesitated only a moment before making his choice. His steps echoed across the marble floor, heavy, deliberate. But they didn't take him toward Elena. They carried him straight toward Richard. No, Richard whispered, stumbling backward. His bravado had drained to nothing, leaving only raw panic. You don't understand, I'm the manager here. You were, the guard said flatly. Not anymore. Gasps scattered through the room like sparks, followed by cheers. Phones tilted higher, recording every second as Richard's last scraps of authority slipped through his fingers. Wait, please. Richard's voice cracked. This is a mistake. You're all making a mistake. Darius didn't move, his arms at his sides, calm as stone. His eyes never left Richard. The only mistake was believing cruelty made you untouchable. It didn't, it made you replaceable. The words struck harder than any shout. Guests applauded, some rising to their feet, their claps reverberating off the chandeliers like thunder. The hostess stood taller now, her face flushed with courage. I warned you, Richard, you can't erase people. Not anymore. Richard's eyes darted wildly, searching for an ally, but found only phones recording his downfall, diners' eyes sharp with judgment, and staff who no longer cowered. You'll regret this, he hissed, though even he didn't believe it. No, Darius replied evenly. The only regret is that it took this long. The guard stepped beside Richard, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Richard recoiled, his voice rising in a final desperate protest. You can't throw me out. This is my life. Darius's voice cut through, final and unyielding. And you threw it away the moment you threw her dignity on the floor. The room fell still at his words. Then, like a wave cresting, applause erupted again, stronger, louder, unified. The guard escorted Richard toward the double doors. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor, a pathetic counterpoint to the roaring verdict of the diners. Phones tracked him every step. At the threshold, Richard turned one last time, eyes wild, mouth open as if to reclaim the room with a final order. But the doors closed behind him with a heavy thud, silencing him for good. Silence lingered, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was relief. Vindication. Elena stood trembling, her hands pressed against her sides, tears finally breaking free, but these weren't tears of humiliation. They were release. Darius turned toward her, his expression softening for the first time all afternoon. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of recognition, of respect. You stay, he said firmly, voice steady enough for the entire room to hear. He goes. The diners cheered. The hostess clapped through her tears. And Elena, still overwhelmed, managed to whisper, "Thank you." Darius gave no speech. No theatrics. Just a glance at the guests, a silent acknowledgement of their witness. Justice had not been shouted into existence. It had been carved, steady and inevitable, by truth itself. The doors shut behind Richard with a heavy, echoing finality. The kind of sound that meant a chapter wasn't just ending, it was sealed. For a moment, silence lingered, thick as smoke. Then applause erupted again, rolling through the dining room like thunder. Diners stood, clapping, cheering, their voices overlapping in a chorus of relief and vindication. Elena stood in the center of it all, trembling, her hands pressed against her sides, her chest rising and falling too fast, tears spilling down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't tears of humiliation. They were something else: release, dignity, survival. The hostess beside her touched her arm gently. You're safe now, she whispered. Elena nodded, barely able to speak. Darius moved forward, every step deliberate, until he stood near Elena. He didn't tower over her. He didn't claim the spotlight. He simply stood beside her, his presence enough to anchor the room. He looked out across the crowd of diners, their phones still raised, their faces lit by the glow of screens and justice. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried weight, as if the room itself had been waiting for it. Some of you came here today for fine wine. Some for a 5-star meal. But what you've witnessed, what we all witnessed, is what 5 stars truly mean. The room hushed, every whisper swallowed by the gravity of his tone. It's not chandeliers, he continued. It's not linen tablecloths, or the price of the menu, or who wears the finest suit in the room. 5 stars mean dignity. It means that every guest is respected. Every worker is valued. Without that, you don't have a restaurant. You have a stage for cruelty. The words struck deep, resonating far beyond the marble floors and crystal glass. Diners nodded. Some clapped softly. Others lowered their phones, realizing they were no longer just witnesses, they were participants in a reckoning. Darius turned to Elena. Her eyes were still wet, her hands shaking, but she stood straighter now, her spine finding strength in the truth around her. You were humiliated, Darius said gently, but loud enough for the room to hear. Not because you failed, but because someone mistook fear for authority. That ends today. Elena's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. Why? Why would you stand up for me? Darius met her gaze steadily. Because this is your restaurant too. You carry it every day. You give it life. Without you, without every worker who pours their soul into this place, Maison Cole is just bricks and chandeliers. Gasps rippled. Some diners wiped their eyes. One man at the bar muttered, "Damn. That's real." The hostess clapped first, tears streaming down her face. Then others joined until the room roared again with applause, but this time not for Richard's fall, for Elena's rise. Darius lifted a hand gently, calming the crowd. His tone shifted, sharper now, a warning etched into every word. Let this be clear. Anyone who strips dignity from another person in these walls has no place here, not as staff, not as guest, not as leader. The line hit like a verdict, echoing off the marble and glass. Diners cheered, some chanting his name softly. Cole. 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 Elena pressed her hands to her chest, her tears unstoppable now, but she was smiling through them. For the first time all shift, she felt not invisible, not disposable, but seen. Darius placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. You stay, he repeated, his voice softer now, meant only for her but carried through the room. Because you belong. The chandeliers glittered overhead, the sunlight still spilling through the glass walls. But the room itself felt transformed, not just a fine dining restaurant, but a place where dignity had been restored, where justice had been served in real time. And for every diner watching, for every phone recording, for every silent witness who had felt powerless before, this was proof. Power didn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply stood. The applause didn't fade this time. It swelled, filling the dining room like a tide that couldn't be turned back. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, whistling, their voices rising in unity. Phones captured every second, their lenses pointed not at chandeliers or plated meals, but at justice unfolding in real time. The hostess wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, still clapping through tears. Other servers began to emerge from the wings of the restaurant, bussers, bartenders, even the line cooks in their aprons. One by one, they stepped closer, forming a quiet semicircle around Elena. For once, the staff didn't look at Richard. They didn't fear him. They looked to her. Elena's chest shook with sobs, but she stood taller than she ever had, surrounded by her peers, her dignity restored. From the back, a diner shouted, "I'll never eat here again if this is how staff are treated." Another voice chimed in, "Not unless she's still here." The crowd murmured in agreement, their loyalty shifting not to Richard's false authority but to the server who had stood silent under his abuse. Darius lifted his phone again. His voice remained calm, but every syllable cut like steel. "Carla, initiate termination protocol." Effective immediately, her reply came crisp through the line. "Confirmed, sir." Access revoked, employment terminated, system updated. The diners gasped, some even cheered. The staff looked at one another, realizing in real time what it meant. Richard Hale's power wasn't just stripped from the room, it was erased from the system, from the very foundation of the company. Darius lowered his phone, his gaze sweeping the room. No more silence. Not here. Not ever again. Applause thundered again, rolling like judgment. Elena pressed a hand over her heart, her tears falling freely, but this time they carried pride. And the restaurant, once filled with fear, now carried the weight of something far rarer in those walls: truth. The air in the dining room had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore, it was certainty. The certainty of justice unfolding in real time. Darius slipped his phone back into his pocket, then fixed his eyes on the staff gathered around Elena. His voice carried not just authority, but finality. Richard Hale is no longer employed by this company. His credentials are revoked, his access terminated, his influence erased. From this moment forward, he is a guest in these walls if he ever dares to step back inside. And like any guest who cannot respect the dignity of others, he will not be welcome here. A wave of gasps followed, then applause, then cheers. Richard, still near the entrance where the guard had left him, staggered back as the words hit him harder than any shove. He tried one last time to recover, his voice breaking. "You can't just erase me. 10 years. I built this place. My blood is in these walls." Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He took one measured step forward, his tone calm as stone. "No, Richard. You didn't build this place, you poisoned it. And today, the poison is gone." Phones recorded every word. Diners clapped, some even standing on their chairs to cheer. The chant began softly. "Out, out, out," until it roared through the room. Richard's face twisted with disbelief. But the doors were already open again, the guard waiting. His power was gone. His title was gone. His reputation was collapsing in real time, broadcast to every phone in the room. He had nothing left but the walk of shame. Slowly, with trembling steps, Richard stumbled toward the exit. His once pristine suit hung loose, his tie askew. Guests filmed from every angle, their voices cutting him deeper than any blade. Justice. Accountability. Dignity first. The guard guided him through the threshold. The doors shut again with that same heavy thud, final and absolute. Darius turned back to the staff, to Elena, to the diners who had borne witness. "This is not the end of a shift," he said firmly. "It's the end of a chapter, one where silence was tolerated. That ends today." The hostess nodded, tears still streaking her face. Elena stood straighter, shoulders squared, her shame burned away in the fire of truth. Darius's eyes swept the room one last time. 5 stars mean nothing if dignity is not the first. The applause thundered, shaking the crystal chandeliers, echoing through the marble floors. And Richard Hale was gone, stripped of power, stripped of illusion, left with nothing but the weight of his own disgrace. The restaurant slowly settled, though the energy still pulsed like a current beneath the chandeliers. Guests whispered to each other, some wiping tears, others shaking their heads at what they'd just witnessed. Phones lowered, but only after capturing the full scope of Richard Hale's downfall. Elena stood at the center, no longer trembling. Her apron was gone, but her dignity, stripped minutes ago, had been returned in full measure. The staff surrounded her, not as shields but as allies, their faces lit with respect. Darius looked at her, his voice steady, almost gentle now. "This isn't about one server. It never was. It's about what this place stands for. Maison Cole doesn't serve luxury, it serves people. And every person who walks through these doors deserves respect." Elena's lips parted, her voice small but sure. "Thank you for seeing me." Darius gave the faintest nod. "You earned that long before I walked in." The diners applauded again, not with thunder this time, but with warmth softer, more human, like a standing ovation that belonged to Elena. A woman at table 3 lifted her phone toward her face, whispering into her stream, "Remember this moment. Remember her. This is what justice looks like." Darius turned back to the room one last time. His words cut through the quiet, every syllable sharp with truth. "You mistook silence for weakness. That was your last mistake. Dignity is not a luxury, it's the standard. And from this day forward, it will be enforced. The chandeliers gleamed brighter, as though sealing the promise in light. Elena inhaled deeply, her shoulders rising with new strength. Around her, staff stood taller, diners clapped with conviction, and the restaurant itself seemed changed less about marble and wine lists, more about the dignity that had finally been restored within its walls. Darius Cole left his glass of water untouched on the table. He didn't need a toast. The moment itself was the celebration, and as he walked toward the doors, the sound that followed him wasn't silence, it was applause, rolling steady, carrying with it a single truth: justice had been served.